Hey there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Classic Gaming Brothers. I'm Seth.
And I'm Zach.
And we are the Classic Gaming Brothers.
That's right. We are the Classic Gaming Brothers.
That's right.
That's right.
It's great being back at the studio, even though I never left.
Yeah, well, that's what happens when you get lost in our building.
Oh, yes. Well, I went to the archives, and I discovered in the archives
Mold?
a passageway.
Oh, okay.
And that passageway led to the airport.
Oh.
And then that airport led me to Vegas.
Oh.
Where I was gambling in a casino, and then producer Doug came up behind me and said, get back to the studios.
That makes sense. Well, in your absence, we had our missing brother Nathan join us, and Nathan learned that the wallpaper in the studio is all from producer Doug's notes, though we did lick his wallpaper for some reason, and I don't know why.
Isn't Nathan on our staff?
Nathan is on our staff, but he's also secretly our brother.
Isn't everyone on our staff our brother?
Yes.
We are the Classic Gaming Brothers. We've never said that we were just two brothers. We are a swarm.
We are Legion.
We are Legion. It's like that cake meme. They're like, wait a minute, this moon it's all brothers. And then the guy behind was just like, always has been. And it's your face.
Yeah, it's just my face.
And then my face is shooting you.
That's a good meme. I like that meme. I like auditory memes. Memes that are you don't physically see. They're just described to you in detail.
Yeah, that's how we do all of our memes.
Well, Seth, I'm happy you're home. I'm happy you're back in the studio. And I know for a fact that you've probably been playing games because it's something that you do pretty frequently. So why don't you tell me what you've recently been playing?
Recently, I've been playing Suzerain, which was released in December of 2020 and developed and published by Torpor Games. In the game, you assume the role of President Anton Rain, and you guide the nation of Swordland, spelled S-O-R-D land. It's a troubled nation. It went through a civil war. It went through a period of unrest, and there's essentially a president that kind of takes the nation out of the state of where it was in and forms a government to kind of bring order. And then there's another president that comes after that one, and that president starts to be a little bit more militaristic and tries to like keep the presidency forever and is a little more corrupt.
Okay.
And then stays in office for a while. And what's cool is in Suzerain, as you play the beginning, the intro, it brings you through a story of your life, and you get to make choices along the way, always leading to you becoming the president at the end of the story, because that's where the game takes off. In my particular intro, the second president, who was the president for a very long time, gets ousted by another president who is a little more like a reformer, and then he overcorrected, and you step up into it and take over the presidency. The character that I'm playing through is trying to just do what's right by the people, so he's pro like helping out poor cities, he's pro unions, he's pro like just like any sort of rights for the people of the country, which makes him popular with the reformer parties, makes him unpopular with the old guard party, and also makes him unpopular with some of the smaller parties, because one of the early things that I did was I approved the needing of having a threshold. So you needed to make 10% of the population of the legislature in order to get funding for your party, and if you didn't get 10%, your party would not get any funding. So there was some kind of like the Communist Party was really mad because then they were no longer getting any money at all. And so apart from that, my character's been pretty much a good reformer. I'm halfway through the game. I've already mostly run out of money, and I haven't stabilized the economy. So, it's a true government simulator there. And I'm excited that once you beat the game, you can stop playing in the mode that it doesn't let you pre-save, so you can't like save scum the first time you play. You have to kind of accept your choices, and it saves but only at checkpoints. Once you beat that mode, you can turn that mode off and you can kind of save scum, so you can kind of make your because you don't know what your consequences are going to be of your actions until they happen. Like, you think that you're maybe making the right choice, but ultimately they're like, it's actually a really wrong choice. And so so that's been Suzerain. I've been enjoying playing that. It's a nice kind of thinking game. It's a good palate cleanser, I guess, for the time being. But I've definitely get more time playing it. It's been enjoyable. What about you? What have you been recently playing?
Well, Seth, I decided to fit into today's theme of the episode, which we're talking about the original 3 Castlevania games that came out on the NES and Famicom. I decided to play some Super Castlevania. Originally released in 1991 for the Super Nintendo, I was playing it via the Castlevania Collection, which is available on Steam and PlayStation and such. I have a copy on Steam. Super Castlevania 4 is the Super Nintendo version of Castlevania, as the name implies. It's a great game. I played it a lot, actually, in middle school on an emulator, and I got pretty far in it back then, but I ended up soft locking myself because I save state just before I died, and I didn't have any backup save states.
Yeah, that's not good.
Yeah, word to the wise, if you're ever playing a game and using save states, make some backup save states just to be safe. But yeah, it was bad, and I didn't replay it after that happened. But now I've been replaying it, and it was a lot of fun. I think it is one of my favorite Castlevania games, which is probably a controversial take because I think most people prefer Symphony of the Night, which is the PS1 Castlevania game that a lot of people are familiar with. But I really like Super Castlevania 4. One of the things I like is that in the game, the whip, you can use it in any direction you want. And one of the things you do if you hold a button is the whip can kind of just like bounce around, and you can like swing it around in circles, and it will do minimum damage to enemies around you, but it's good at stun locking enemies. I think it's a fun game. It can be frustrating at times, but the whole franchise can be frustrating at times. So I don't think that is par for the course. That's what I've been recently playing, and also some of my memories of Castlevania. So Seth, before we get into the history, do you have any memories of any of the Castlevania games?
No, beyond the ones that I've played inevitably throughout doing this podcast, I didn't play a lot of Castlevania games or even Metroid games back in the day. They were never on game systems that we really owned or anything like that. So I didn't get any fond attachments to them. I don't mind them, and I've played them since, but I don't have any like core memories that live in my brain for them.
Well, to get into today's episode, the original Castlevania was developed by Konami, with the project being directed by Hitoshi Akamatsu. Akamatsu was a big fan of Western movies, in particular classic Universal horror films like Dracula and Frankenstein, but also action films like Raiders of the Lost Ark, which is why the main character in Castlevania uses a whip. Another example of him being a fan of these movies is actually the character of Simon Belmont originally was going to be named Peter Dante, after both the actors Peter Cushing and the director Joe Dante, who had both been involved in horror films. Joe Dante was involved with Gremlins, and Peter Cushing was involved with the Hammer horror films back in the 70s. Akamatsu wanted to develop a game that was a pastiche of these elements that he liked, these horror and action elements. And this led to the development of the first Castlevania game released in Japan as Akumojo Dracula, literally translated to Devil's Castle Dracula. Now, not a ton is known about the original development of the game, largely because by some sources it was even hard to track down the original creator. In fact, the credits for Castlevania don't credit Akamatsu. They credit a pseudonym by the name of Bram Stoker, a play on Bram Stoker, the original author of the Dracula novel. The reason for the use of a pseudonym varies, but this was a common thing back in early video games, and it's widely believed to be due to preventing headhunting from rival studios. So if Konami had a director they really liked and they didn't want to be picked up by Capcom or some other company, they would credit that director under a pseudonym, which I think when you think about it is a little scummy because that's not giving proper credit to someone. Now, if Akamatsu wanted to be credited under a pseudonym, that's a little different, but if the company was doing it solely to prevent him going to a different company that could pay him differently, I think it's a little scummy to change someone's name without their permission, but that's just my opinion. In a developer commentary that was published by a colleague of Akamatsu, and it was published via the website shmuplations.com. The colleague who, I couldn't find the name of this colleague, so went unnamed as of the recording of this episode, noted that Akamatsu was a bit of a perfectionist in making sure that the character of Simon Belmont controlled incredibly tightly. He wanted everything to feel like it fit together, and wanted the main character's controls to feel tight enough that they felt like an extension of the player's limbs. When responding to criticism about how easy it was for the main character to be launched back into a death pit, Akamatsu reportedly responded by saying, "Hey, look at it this way. Simon doesn't die from one hit. Mario does."
Another part of Akamatsu's mindset, according to Smupulations.com, was that he wanted the items in the game to teach the players how to play. For example, he introduced the stopwatch item to make sure players could become familiar with enemy attacks. He made certain bosses, like the fight with Death, difficult in order to teach the players to use specific sub-weapons with these bosses. Reportedly, his measure of difficulty was whether or not he could clear his own game. Despite having a very game design based mindset, Akamatsu didn't quite get the technical side of development. This led to some quirks in the original Castlevania, such as the fact that when you finally defeat Dracula, you'll only get 1 point. Reportedly, this is due to the fact that he had set the wrong bit in the code for a point value and wanted to award the players with 10,000 points. Some planned features in the game, such as the ability to use your whip in multiple directions, was also not able to be implemented. There were also plans for an item that would turn you into a werewolf, but this was also cut. Also from Smupulations.com, it's reported that Akamatsu had a filmmaker's mindset when it came to developing his games. He visually wanted each frame to look good and wanted the games to have a film-like aesthetic to them. This can be seen even from the opening credits of Castlevania, where you see what looks like to be sprocket holes of a film reel on the title screen. Based on the information from the write-up, it seems that Akamatsu had a visual and music first take on the game, with gameplay really coming in as his number 2. He really wanted visuals and music, and then gameplay. Not that he didn't find gameplay important, but he wanted the games to always be cinematic. Akumaju Dracula would release in 1986 for the Famicom Disk System. It would be brought over to America the next year and released as Castlevania. The name being changed due to Konami of America not being a big fan of the name Devil's Castle Dracula. Due to the potential religious connotations, it would go on to release in North America, and that also coincided with the 90th anniversary of Dracula.
Which is good timing on their part. Releasing simultaneously as Akumaju Dracula was a version of the game for the MSX2, released as Vampire Killer in Europe. Vampire Killer is kind of interesting in its own right, hence why we're mentioning it, as it's not necessarily a direct port of the Famicom version, but rather has some unique gameplay mechanics, such as being more open-ended and less linear. In fact, the open-ended nature of the game makes it more similar to later Castlevania games, which took on this less linear style. The gameplay of the original Castlevania and Vampire Killer is pretty straightforward. You explore Dracula's castle as Simon Belmont, who is a vampire hunter. You are armed with a whip. You can pick up various items as sub-weapons, such as a knife, holy water, axe, cross, a stopwatch, etc. And using the sub-weapons uses up energy, which are represented by hearts. Your goal is to stop Dracula. Now, if you ever play Castlevania for the first time, you might be confused by the hearts. Hearts do not give you health. Hearts give you energy to use your weapons. And if you pick up money, that is your score. Apparently, Akamatsu thought it made complete total sense that these symbols are representing these things. In fact, apparently one of his colleagues had asked him, "Do you think players will get it that you're supposed to pick up meat to heal yourself?" And he said, "Why wouldn't they get it? It's obvious." Now, Castlevania would get released, it would do well, and the first sequel, Simon's Quest, Castlevania 2 Simon's Quest, would be developed shortly thereafter. The game in Japan was called Dracula 2 Norai no Fuin, literally Dracula 2 Seal of the Curse, although Akamatsu himself would be responsible for the Western name, Simon's Quest. He was the one that suggested that name. The sequel was inspired by a game called The Maze of Gallius, a Konami released title for the MSX that featured more open exploration. Akamatsu liked this idea and he wanted to incorporate it into Castlevania, so he did so with Simon's Quest. He also added a timing mechanic and experience points so that you could level up your character. The non-linear gameplay would often get compared to Metroid at the time, leading to the gameplay to be referred to as Metroidvania, which is a name that has since stuck with this type of game and this genre. Metroidvania is in fact its own subgenre of games. So if you go to Steam, you look up Metroidvania, you're going to find a bunch of stuff. Now, the experience points that are now featured in Simon's Quest could be used to level up the character. The timing mechanic is really interesting as it's a day to night cycle. So if you're in a village during the day, you can encounter NPCs to talk to or trade with, but at night, you'll encounter enemies in that village that you now have to fight. And you will encounter enemies during the day, but they are much harder at night because they are, I guess, powered by the night. Your goal in the game, and and most of the story involves you trying to find missing pieces of Dracula's body in order to properly dispose of them, though when you collect each part of his body, that part of the body kind of like helps you. You can like use it as an item, which is, I guess, similar to Mega Man in the sense that you could like, when you defeat a robot boss, you'll get their power.
That's fun, and it's also fun that it's a body part.
Yes.
The game would release on the Famicom Disk System in 1987, and when ported to the NES, certain changes had to be made. For example, the NES version uses a password backup function instead of an actual save function. The NES version also has a slightly better music as they had more space than the disk system. Notably, the cover of the game directly rips off the cover of the 1983 Ravenloft module, with the Dracula standing behind Simon being actually Strahd, which, I mean, Strahd is a vampire, so...
Do you see the picture? I
do see the picture. It is the same. It looks like he's just turning to look, but it's the same exact picture, including the same... gargoyle.
Yeah.
And they did like put a picture of Simon. They did like drop him in the foreground. I'm just wondering, so like the perspective of the Ravenloft Strahd picture is from just underneath a balcony, and you look up and you see Strahd and the wind's blowing, and he's clearly standing into some sort of like balcony, right? Looking out his balcony. There's other pictures farther away of this same shot where he's clearly in a balcony in a castle. They use the same image for the box art for Castlevania 2, Simon's Quest, except Simon is layered in the foreground, which draws in questions of how far away is that balcony? It like is Simon like flying up there? Is the balcony only like 6 inches off the ground? Like, what is going on with the picture? And it looks like he's doing a bad selfie, which... This was even before the eras of selfies, so I don't get what's going on.
If Simon wasn't holding his whip, it kind of looks like he's taking a bad selfie with just Dracula awkwardly behind him.
The third game, Castlevania 3 Dracula's Curse, in Japan known as Akumaju Densetsu, or literally Legend of the Devil's Castle, would be developed soon after the second game would be released. Reportedly, Akamatsu wanted to outdo the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game from Konami. Largely, the TMNT team at Konami was prioritized due to the success of the game overseas, and in the write-up from Shmupulations.com, it's reported that it was due to the TMNT game that future Famicom Castlevania games were not developed. So, Akamatsu wanted to show the competition in his own company what's going on. One element of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles that likely influenced Castlevania 3 was the fact that the game featured multiple player characters, each having a slightly different ability. Some other inspirations came from the film Song of Dracula in 1943. This would be the introduction of the character of Alucard, whose name is originally from Son of Dracula and is literally just Dracula, spelled backwards, which is pretty unique and original.
Now, another source of inspiration was actual true history. Dracula's Curse would directly link the story of Dracula, the Bram Stoker character, with the history of Vlad III of Wallachia, aka Vlad the Impaler, aka Vlad Dracul. In the Japanese release of the game, there's a character in the game named Grant Daneshti, whose name is a direct reference to the House of Daneshti, a historical actual family that existed and were at conflict with House Dracul. In fact, Vlad III killed, I think his name was Dan of Danestri, who was one of their family members, in a duel. So they really pulled from history for this one.
Dracula, Vlad the Impaler versus Dan?
Yes, Dan the Third of Wallachia. Nice. Dan the Third of Wallachia, aka known as Dan the Younger, who was killed by his cousin, Vlad Dracul, in a duel in 1456.
Nice.
And Vlad Dracul's half-brother, Vlad the Monk, and Dan's brother, Barsab Leota, laid claim to Wallachia against Dracula.
His Dan's brother?
Yeah, it was just a whole family was just involved in the situation.
Oh, Dan's brother.
Dan's brother, not Dan's brother.
I thought you said his Dan's brother.
No.
I was like, and Dracula's Dan's brother.
No, Dan the Second, aka Dan the Younger, had a brother named Basarab.
Yes.
And Vlad Dracul had a brother named Vlad the Monk. And Vlad the Monk and Basarab both said Wallachia belongs to us, and they went against Vlad Dracula.
It'd been funnier if he had a dance brother.
I bet you weren't expecting Classic Gaming Brothers fans some history of 15th century Romania. The gameplay of Dracula's Curse is interesting. It returns the game to a mostly linear structure, but with the addition of new playable characters. You start the game as Trevor Belmont, an ancestor to Simon Belmont, but you can later team up with Grant Danasty, his name is slightly changed from Danasty, who is a pirate that has the ability to climb walls and change direction mid-jump, Saifa Belnades, a sorceress who can use magical abilities, and Alucard, again, a Dhampir, the son of Dracula, who can shoot fireballs and turn into a bat. The game does have some non-linear element, specifically in that there are branching pathways you can take. This also means the game has multiple endings depending on the choices you make. The cartridge for Dracula's Curse is interesting. The original Famicom version has a VRC6 coprocessor that would help improve the music by adding 2 extra pulse wave channels and an additional saw wave channel. The NES couldn't support this, so the North American release contains a Memory Management Controller 5 chip, which tries to do basically the same thing, works a little differently, but the music in Dracula's Curse is pretty good. I should also preface the fact that the music in all of Castlevania is amazing. Every song is just a banger. Even the worst games probably in the series have the best music in the series. It is good stuff. Dracula's Curse is no exception. Some of the music is great. I'll drop some music here. There are also some gameplay differences between the Japanese and Western releases. The Japanese version, again, that character of Grant, is able to throw his daggers as opposed to just being able to stab in the Western version. The Western release also contains a hidden cheat code. If you type the name Help Me as your name at the beginning of the game, you will gain 10 lives at the beginning of the game so that you can keep playing and not have to die as many times as you will. Dracula's Curse is amazing. It's a great title. I highly recommend it, and it would release in 1989 in Japan, 1990 in North America, and 1992 in Europe, which is so late for a NES game. That is ridiculously late, 1992.
All 3 of the original Castlevania games for the Famicom NES were well received. The first game received an 80% from Computer and Video Games, an 8 out of 10 from Famitsu, and a 4 out of 5 from the magazine Beep. In the years since, the game has been regarded as one of the better games for the NES, though often less favorable to some of the sequels like Castlevania 3, Super Castlevania 4, or Symphony of the Night. Simon's Quest has also had some fairly decent reviews, though has more of a mixed legacy. One American publication, Computer Entertainment, would say that the game outdoes its predecessor and called the game very well crafted. Later reviews from GameSpot would also praise the game's length, calling it an excellent time killer. However, some criticism has been found to be critical of the amount of backtracking you need to do, the day-to-night cycles, and the poor translations. Dracula's Curse would score well on release as well. It received a 30 out of 40 from Famitsu, an 80% from Total! And 4.5 from All Game. Reviews at the time found that the game was a strong return to form for the series, though some would criticize the difficulty. In the years since, it's been ranked as one of the best NES games of all time.
Now, in terms of its legacy, Castlevania powered on. However, without Akamatsu, really, he left Konami pretty shortly after the development of the last Castlevania game for the NES, Castlevania 3. He would also reportedly leave the game industry and has not really been public in the years since. In the write-up I was reading from Shmuplations, the person they were talking to did say that they had spoken to him at previous times and had asked him if he had ever played any of the later Castlevania games, and apparently Akamatsu had not. The series wouldn't stop without him. It would keep going. The series would jump to the portable scene with the releases of Castlevania The Adventure in 1989 for the Game Boy, and its sequel, Castlevania 2, Belmont's Revenge, released in 1991. The series made a massive leap to 16-bit in Super Castlevania 4 in 1991, which also saw the return of Simon Belmont and featured improved gameplay. The series would then branch out from Nintendo consoles. There was Rondo of Blood in 1993 for the PC Engine, Castlevania Bloodlines for the Sega Genesis, and a remake of Rondo of Blood would come out on the SNES called Castlevania Dracula X. games. One of the most influential releases in the series would actually be Castlevania Symphony of the Night in 1997. That game not only acted as a direct sequel to Rondo of Blood, but also was inspired by elements of Simon's Quest, bringing back that open-ended Metrovania style of gameplay, and Symphony of the Night would become pretty much the trendsetter for future Castlevania games. Almost all of the Castlevania games following Symphony of the Night, with a few exceptions, and Seth will mention those exceptions in a moment, but of those few exceptions, followed very similar gameplay style and very similar aesthetic. They took on kind of a more anime aesthetic. They focused more on characters like Alucard and characters connected to Alucard and stuff like that. They focused a little less on the Belmonts, though the Belmonts would still have some play in the series. And yeah, they really just kind of branched off of Symphony of the Night.
And from there, the series kept going. It leapt into 3D in 1999 on the N64, Castlevania and the Legacy of Darkness, and a series of games would release on GBA and the Nintendo DS, taking a lot of inspiration from the gameplay styles of Symphony of the Night. There were also some non-canon spin-off games, such as the Kid Dracula games for both Famicom and Game Boy, which served as parodies of the Castlevania series. Outside of the Castlevania games themselves, Simon Belmont would appear in the show Captain N, the Game Master, who we had Josh on to talk about.
Josh did not come on to talk about. He talked about 007 games. He had a Patreon exclusive podcast that he does about Captain N.
The game Dracula's Curse would also serve as direct inspiration for the Castlevania Netflix series that first aired in 2017, and a new series, Nocturne, would debut in 2023, inspired by Rondo of Blood. The characters of Simon Belmont and Richter Belmont would appear in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. Simon and Alucard also appear in the fighting game Brawlhalla. Richter would appear in an expansion pack for Dead Cells, Simon as an option boss in the V Rising. Dracula and Trevor Belmont would appear in Dead by Daylight, and there would be an Ode to Castlevania DLC for the game Vampire Survivors. So even up until the modern day, we are still calling back to Castlevania. There would be also a series of Castlevania-esque games with the release of the Bloodstained games developed by Koji Igarashi, who worked on Symphony of the Night, while Bloodstained Ritual of the Night and its sequel, The Scarlet Engagement, are 3D games that take a lot of inspiration from Symphony of the Night. There were two 2D NES-style companion games that take more inspiration from Castlevania and Dracula's Curse. These would be Bloodstained Curse of the Moon and Curse of the Moon 2.
And Bloodstained Curse of the Moon is fantastic. It is an amazing game, and it only came about because it was a Kickstarter stretch goal. Basically, Koji Igarashi had put out a Kickstarter for the development of Ritual of the Night and said, I'm making this new game called Ritual of the Night. It's going to be a really great game. If I get this much money, I will make a 2D NES-style companion game called Curse of the Moon. And it made that goal, and then Curse of the Moon came out, and everyone loved it. In fact, I think people like Curse of the Moon more than Ritual of the Night, which Ritual of the Night isn't a bad game. It's just Curse of the Moon is a great game. It's amazing. Now, that will do it, I think, for our Castlevania series, and I want to tell you, listeners, that not only will we likely revisit Castlevania in a future date, because I do want to do an episode on Symphony of the Night and maybe talk about the N64 games because they're a little weird, but I want to let you know, listeners, that this is the first episode of what I'm calling Classic Gaming Tober, where we're going to focus on games of the more spooky variety. So with this being the end of September, I thought this was the perfect doorway into our new little marathon that we're going to do of just having a focus on horror-themed video games for the next couple of weeks. So welcome to Classic Gaming Tober. I'll think of a better name for it later.
Are we going to wear pumpkins on our heads?
Yeah, I'm just going to replace our heads with pumpkins.
I'm excited about this whole theme that I didn't even know we were doing.
Yeah. Well, you see from the notes, you see I've got a couple of fun games lined up.
Oh, I didn't read that far in advance.
Well, to get into our retro rewind, Seth had me play a game called Mars Attacks for MS-DOS, developed by a company called Game Pig Office in 1997. I had assumed Mars Attacks was going to be a game based on the movie of the same name. Boy, howdy, was I wrong. Not only does it share none of the humor aesthetic of the 1996 Mars Attacks movie, I barely describe it as a game. It's a knockoff of Space Invaders, where you play as what looks like a tiny rocket ship on what I think is Mars. Mars, though I can't really tell. It's a planet of some sort, and behind you is Jupiter. So I don't think it's Mars, because I don't think you can see Jupiter that well from Mars. But you are being attacked by giant spike balls, which descend on you. I think they're shooting you, but they use the exact same sprite for their bullets as they use for the actual ship. So that you just have giant versions of the ship coming at you, or giant bullets, I guess, as you shoot equally large bullets at them that are the same sprite. So it's like you're shooting them at themselves. It's very weird, very poorly made. Also, it's completely in Russian. So not only could I not read any of the text to start the game, I had to kind of guess. I couldn't read any of the text to do any of the settings or anything like that, or read the plot of the game because it was all in Russian. Now, I couldn't also figure out how to get the sound to work in the game, as it defaulted to PC speaker sound, which is that annoying beeper sound effect that you get from a PC speaker. Does Mars Attacks hold up? No. Next week, Seth, I want you to play a game for MS-DOS. Oh, I guess I could give you a horror game. I had a whole different game in mind, but I'm not going to give you a horror game this week. I'll give you a horror game maybe next week. I want you to play 3D Hero for MS-DOS.
Don't worry, Zach. I will be giving you a horror game for your October Retro Rewind.
Oh, good.
Zach had me play Double Dare for the NES, which was a game that was developed by Rare for the NES, and it was published by Game Tech and released in 1988 for the Commodore 64, and then ported by Rare to the NES in 1990. In the game, you could play as either a single player or two players. If you play a single player, you compete against the computer. There are 2 rounds of 10 questions trivia, and then there's a third round of obstacle courses where you use the D-pad and the buttons to navigate it. The prizes that you can win while playing Double Dare are a BMX bike, a television set, an NES console, or even an exotic vacation. All virtual, so you're not actually winning anything. But except for the fun time that you have while playing Double Dare with your friend. They're pretty well made games for the time. They reflect well on the show, and they play like a game show would play on the NES. I would recommend it if you are nostalgic for Double Dare. I think it definitely holds up. I think they're pretty valid contenders for this style of game. And next week, Zach, you could play Oregon Trail 3, as I said, a game of horror.
That is a terrifying game. I don't know if I'm going to be able to sleep after playing Oregon Trail 3. Anyway, listener, if you have any fun memories of playing Castlevania or any of the Castlevania games, let us know. You can do so by emailing us at classicgamingbrothers@gmail.com. We're available wherever podcasts can be found, be it Podbean, iTunes, or iHeartRadio. We're available on social media. Look us up, Classic Gaming Brothers or CG Brothers Pod. We're available on Twitch, Classic Gaming Brothers, on YouTube, Classic Gaming Brothers, and we're also available on our website, www.classicgamingbrothers.com. With that, Seth, I think I got everything, but did I forget anything?
Don't play games like my brother.
And don't play games like my brother.
I've been Seth.
And I've been Zach.
And we've been the Classic Gaming Brothers.
That's right.
Right.